Hello again, my friends. In one of my previous videos, I said I was going to tackle 1 Corinthians 15. Now, this passage is the go-to scripture for apologists when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus. Okay, the resurrection is of utmost importance for Christianity because without it, Christianity is false. Paul said himself that if the resurrection hadn't happened, then their faith is in vain. So it is vitally important for them to show that Jesus actually resurrected. So this is it. 1 Corinthians 15, debunked. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also. Alright, so then my plan is to go through this list of Pauls, of people that Jesus appeared to, and look at them one by one and see, is it feasible? Did Jesus make these post-mortem appearances to the disciples and others? Alright, so the first one on Paul's list is Cephas. Alright, so the story goes that the disciples were all sequestered in a locked upper room in Jerusalem. They'd locked themselves away out of fear of reprisals from the Romans and other Jews. The two disciples that went to Emmaus in Luke 24 verses 13 to 32 had now returned, and they joined the other disciples in the upper room. When they got into the upper room, these two disciples from Emmaus said, "The Lord has risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." They're referring here to Simon Peter, who is Cephas. Cephas was a nickname given by Jesus to Simon Peter. So, after Jesus' death, Simon Peter was the de facto leader of the disciples. He was in the upper room at the time that the two travelers from Emmaus came back. It says so in Acts 1 verse 13, where it actually lists all the people that were in the upper room, and the first name listed is Simon Peter. So Simon Peter was in the upper room at the time that the two disciples came in and said that the Lord has arisen, he has appeared to Cephas. Now you've got to ask yourselves the question, if Jesus had appeared to Cephas, why didn't Cephas say something? Why didn't Simon Peter say something? You would expect he would have, considering he was the first person on the list of Paul at least, even though he wasn't the first person that was apparently appeared to, he should have been overjoyed at having Jesus appear to him. He would have been telling everybody about it. And yet it took two travelers arriving at the upper room to make this announcement that he had been appeared to when he was already in the room. Okay, now these two travelers from Emmaus, and we're going to deal with them in a minute, they had just been visited by Jesus on their journey to Emmaus. Logically, if they'd walked into the upper room, their news would have been, guess what? We've just seen Jesus. Not Cephas had met with Jesus. Another question is, how would these travelers have known that Jesus appeared to Cephas? Cephas and the disciples had been locked in the upper room since the crucifixion. These two travelers after the crucifixion traveled to Emmaus and back again. They couldn't possibly have known what happened to Cephas in the meantime because he had been locked in the upper room. So, did Jesus meet with Cephas? I don't know. But if using logic and reason as your foundation, I find it extremely unlikely. Alright, so the next on Paul's list is Jesus met with the 12. This is exactly the same meeting we've just been speaking about, where the 12 disciples are locked in the upper room in Jerusalem. And according to John 20 verse 19, Jesus appears in the room. Alright, so here's where I have a problem with it. They were locked in a room, and Jesus suddenly appears. Much is made about Jesus' bodily resurrection, that he rose bodily, not in a spirit form. At the empty tomb, the body is missing. Thomas is shown Jesus' hands and feet, and he has to stick his fingers or something in there to test that it's real. And in Luke 24 verse 39, Jesus says, "See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." So even Jesus is emphasizing the fact that he has a physical body, not a spirit one. How does a physical body suddenly appear in a locked room? The only possible explanation could be that somebody unlocked the door and let him in. But if you look at the way Gospels are written, this would have been accounted for. There would have been something in there that said Jesus knocked on the door, Barnabas, Lazarus, somebody opened for him, he came in and he stood amongst them. But it doesn't say that. The scripture says he just stood amongst them. So, did Jesus appear to the 12? I don't know. Unless there is some part of the story that's undocumented that we need to know about. And if you exclude the possibility of a miracle happening where Jesus was miracled into the room, those two aside, I find it extremely unlikely. All right, next up, according to Paul, was Jesus appeared to the 500, or in some places it says more than 500. This, out of all of them, is the wildest claim. If Jesus had appeared to 500 plus people, this would have been documented somewhere, either biblically or extra biblically, and there's not a trace of this anywhere. Only Paul seemed to be aware of these 500, and he wasn't even one of them. Could this event be referring to Mark 16 verse 7, where Jesus tells the three women to pass on this bit of information? "But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." This is possibly the closest I could come to explaining it away, but this verse feels more like Jesus is telling the women to tell the disciples, and only the disciples, to meet him in Galilee, not a large throng of people. All right, Paul very cleverly throws in some of them are still alive and you can go speak to them if you want to, with the implication that you could just go check with them if you don't believe what I'm saying. Check with who? There's no names, no addresses. It just says 500. We've got no idea who the 500 are. You can't go check with them. All right, so did Jesus appear to 500? I don't know. To me, it feels that without any corroborating evidence, it just seems highly unlikely. All right, next, according to Paul, Jesus appears to James. Now, we are not told specifically, is Paul referring to James the Just, which is the supposed brother of Jesus, or is he referring to James the Less, which would be the son of Cleopas, which would make him Jesus' cousin? So this is just another bold assertion with no corroboration or evidence to back it up. There are places where James, the brother of the Lord, is referred to, Cephas and other places, but these have been debunked. There's no reason to believe that Jesus had a brother named James. That brother couldn't just mean a brother in the Lord, just as you have brothers, sisters, fathers in a religious connotation. But even that aside, we don't know which James is talking about or what the event is. So without corroboration, we don't know. So did Jesus appear to James? I don't know. We would need more information to be able to back it up. Without that information, we would have to say it's probably highly unlikely. All right, so next on Paul's list is that Jesus appeared to the disciples. Now, we are unsure whether he's talking about the meeting at the Sea of Tiberias in John 21 or the mountain in Galilee in Matthew 28. In either case, if you remove the possibility of miracles, The stories are rendered impossibly flawed with inconsistencies. And lastly, Paul says that Jesus appeared to Paul himself. Here he's referring to the conversion on the road to Damascus when he was converted from Saul to Paul. Of all the documented appearances, this one is the flimsiest. In this story, Paul experiences a flash of light. He falls down to the ground, and he hears a voice saying something to the effect of, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he asked, who is this? And it says, I am Jesus. Firstly, this doesn't qualify as an appearance. Paul doesn't see anything. And the passage specifically says that the people with him don't see anything either. They hear, but they don't see. The question is, what do they hear? Do they hear the entire conversation, or do they just hear Paul's rambling while he's lying on the floor? Then it also says that Paul is struck by blindness, and this blindness remains for 7 days until he is healed by Ananias. If it had been a physical appearance, everybody in attendance would have seen it as well. All right, so this flash of light, falling to the ground, and temporary blindness, could this have been a medical condition that was misconstrued as a religious phenomenon? Keeping in mind that in first century Palestine, people were rife with superstition and myth. Could this have been a seizure of some type? Postictal blindness you can follow a grand mal seizure, which is often brought about by epilepsy. This postictal blindness is temporary and can last from several days to several weeks. And in the case of Paul, it lasted for 7 days. The symptoms Paul displayed are indicative of temporal lobe epilepsy. In Galatians 4, verses 12 to 14, Paul admits that he suffers some illness that causes other people to reject him. Interestingly, the word in verse 4 for reject in the Greek is ekptio, which means to spit. He's actually saying, you didn't spit on me. Epilepsy was called that disease before which one spits. Spitting was a superstitious action following an epileptic seizure. There are other examples of grand mal seizures in the Bible. For example, Luke 9 verses 37 to 43, about the boy who is possessed by demons. And once the seizure is over, then he is miraculously healed by Jesus. In order for Paul to be accepted into this group, he had to convince Barnabas and the others that he had witnessed the resurrected Jesus. It was one of the original unwritten rules of entry into the club. Curiously, out of all these post-mortem appearances of Jesus, according to Matthew 28 verses 16 to 17, it says that even amongst the disciples, some of them doubted. Now you have to ask yourself why. Why would the disciples still doubt after all this evidence? All right, so having dealt with Paul's list, there are 2 others I would like to touch on because they are of some real significance. The first one is found in John 20 verses 14 to 16. This is where Mary Magdalene has just arrived at Jesus' empty tomb. She's distraught after finding the body is missing. She turns around and sees Jesus standing there, but she doesn't recognize him. She mistakes him for the gardener. Now you've got to ask yourself, how is this possible? This isn't just some stranger. This is Mary Magdalene, Jesus' closest female disciple. This is the one female that never left his side. She was believed by many to be Jesus' love interest in the story. And there's been even much speculation that he married her. How could Mary Magdalene not have recognized Jesus standing in front of her? And that's not the only instance. I'm now referring to those two people on the road to Emmaus that we spoke about earlier. This is found in Luke 24 verses 13 to 32. This passage tells us that two disciples are walking along the road from Jerusalem to Emmaus after the crucifixion. Only one of them is named, Cleopas. The other disciple is not named. We know that Cleopas was married to Mary, the sister of Jesus' mother Mary. So Mary, the wife of Cleopas, was Jesus' aunt, which made Cleopas Jesus' uncle. It's fairly safe to assume that if Cleopas was walking back to Emmaus after the crucifixion, the disciple with him was probably his wife. As they were walking along the road, a stranger joins them on their travels, and as they're walking, they're chatting about several things. These two disciples don't recognize him. They get to Emmaus, to the room, to the house where they're going to be staying, and Jesus says, I'm going to carry on, and these two say, no, come in, stay with us, have some dinner with us. Jesus agrees. They go upstairs, they prepare the meal. It's only when Jesus breaks the bread that they suddenly realize they're with Jesus. Now, they've just spent an entire journey together. These aren't two strangers. It's Jesus' aunt and uncle. They know him well. Jesus' aunt was at his crucifixion. How is it possible that they did not recognize him? The last point I want to bring up is maybe significant. Why is it that all post-mortem appearances, resurrection appearances of Jesus, the claimed ones, were all to disciples or believers? Why did Jesus not appear to anybody outside of this tight-knit group of already believers? Surely if he had appeared to other people, if he'd appeared to people who could document it, this would be more believable. Why did he only appear to the small, tight-knit group of believers? All right, so these are just some things to think about. And as always, I'd love to hear your comments, love to hear your thoughts on it. As always, like, subscribe. And as I always say, if you're already a subscriber, please share this with somebody else. Maybe they'll find it interesting. Who knows? As always, it's been lovely speaking to you guys. And I look forward to the next time. Keep well and bye-bye.